Bon, je suis très heureux de recevoir aujourd'hui, au nom des professeurs au Collège de France, notre collègue, le professeur Yamada, qui est, comme vous le savez, professeur à l'université de Tsukuba. Notre collaboration avec lui vient du fait qu'il est un des épigraphistes sur le site de Tabatum, où il a trouvé des tablettes très importantes qui sont un petit peu proches de celles de Marie. Et donc, Nele Ziegler a pu instaurer une fructueuse collaboration entre Mariotte et l'université de Tsukuba, ce qui nous a donné le plaisir d'aller au Japon vous rendre visite. C'est un pays qui est toujours très agréable à fréquenter. Mais aujourd'hui, c'est pour sa véritable spécialisation, c'est-à-dire les textes néo-assyriens, que nous l'avons invité au Collège de France et que nous allons l'écouter. Et c'est quelqu'un qui doit participer au grand projet du corpus des éditions assyriennes faites maintenant sous la direction de Grand Frame. Et il prépare une nouvelle édition de Tiglath-Pileser et de Salmanasar, son fils. Et c'est à ce titre-là que nous allons l'écouter. Alors, le professeur Tsukuba va vous parler anglais, parce que c'est peut-être plus facile pour vous de le comprendre qu'en japonais. J'avais prévu de faire une traduction ponctuelle, mais je sais qu'en général, lorsque quelque chose est annoncé en anglais, il y a très peu de gens, et j'imagine que les gens qui sont ici sont tous parfaitement anglophones. Donc, je vais m'abstenir de faire une traduction et nous allons écouter le professeur Yamada. Tout le monde comprend l'anglais ici. Madame, vous comprenez l'anglais? Bien. C'est bien. Bon, eh bien, nous allons vous écouter.
Thank you very much, Professor Durand. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm actually tempted to say here something nice in French, but I'm not adventurous enough to try it with my so poor French that is unfortunately almost nothing. Let me speak in English so I can be more communicative. I have very rarely been in Paris until the last year. Paris was a distant city for me that was perhaps seen twinkling in distance. And it was a great pleasure and honor to give a talk at the academic center in such a city, Paris. I'm most grateful to Professor Durand to let me have this wonderful opportunity. And my recent visit to Paris were, as Professor Durand said, that enabled by the French-Japanese cooperative study project on the cuneiform source of the 2nd millennium BC, relating to the Habur region in Syria. This project, whose code name is Sakura, meaning cherry blossom in Japanese. The project is represented by Dr. Nele Ziegler from French side and myself from Japanese side. And I have benefited from this project countless good things, academic, of course, and personal. And I'd like to thank in this occasion Dr. Nele Ziegler and all the members of the project, Japanese and French, for their cooperation and assistance, since they actually brought me here. I also wish to express my sincere thanks for the warmest encouragement and very warm thinking for us by my friend here recently in the hard time of Japan after the very strong earthquakes and the secondary disasters. I shall start to talk on the subject, the reign and inscriptions of Tiglath-Pileser III and Assyrian Empire Builder. The Assyrian king Tiglath-Pileser III has attracted much scholarly interest since the very dawn of the Assyriology. in the beginning of the archaeological exploration of ancient Mesopotamia in the mid-19th century, French and English explorers Paul-Émile Botta and Aussi Hendin Layard competed to discover the remnant remains of Assyrian rural cities along the Tigris River. These cities are Dur-Sharkin, Karhu, and Nineveh. Assyria is described in the Hebrew Bible and in a series of classical legends to have been a large empire which covered the entire territory of the ancient Near East. Several names of Assyrian kings such as Tiglath-Pileser, Shalmaneser, Sennacherib, and Esarhaddon are attested in the Bible, with stories of the aggression and the dominion of Assyrian Empire over the Hebrew kingdom of Israel and Judah and other countries in Syria and Palestine. Tiglath-Pileser is specifically recorded in the Bible as the first Assyrian king who invaded into Palestine, conquered and annexed the northern part of the kingdom of Israel. Let me quote two relevant passages from the Book of Kings. I quote, "Then the king Rezin of Aram and King Pekah, son of Remaliah of Israel, came up to wage war on Jerusalem. Ahaz, king of Judah, sent messengers to King Tiglath-Pileser of Assyria, saying, 'I am your servant and your son. Come up and rescue me from the hand of the king of Aram and from the hand of the king of Israel who are attacking me.' Ahaz also took the silver and gold found in the house of the Lord and in the treasures of the king's house and sent a present to the king of Assyria. The king of Assyria listened to him. The king of Assyria marched up against Damascus and took it, carrying its people captive to Kir. Then he killed Rezin." The second passage reads, "In the days of King Pekah of Israel, King Tiglath-Pileser of Assyria came and captured Iyon, Abel-Beth-Maachah, Yanoah, Kedesh, Hatzor, Gilead, and Galilee, all the land of Naphtali. And he carried the people captive to Assyria." This Tiglath-Pileser is identified with the third Assyrian king called Tukulti-Apil-Eshara in his native Akkadian language. And the name means "my trust is in the ear of Eshara," and the ear of Eshara means the god Ninurta. This man, whom we call Tiglath-Pileser III, since he is the third king of this name, this man reigned the king of Assyria for 18 years from 744 to 727 BC. The search for new evidence for Assyrian king who played a crucial role in stories told in the Bible was of prime interest in the pioneering archaeological research in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. The 1845 French excavations of Paul-Émile Botta at Khorsabad is crowned with the glory of the first European discovery of an Assyrian palatial structure, where he found the remains of the ancient royal city Dur-Sharkin, which was constructed by Sargon II, the second successor of Tiglath-Pileser III. As is well known, especially here in Paris, spectacular reliefs and sculptures from Sargon's palace were transported to be exhibited in the Louvre as the first European exhibition of major Assyrian palatial art. This is the photograph that I visited the Louvre last year. Soon after this discovery of Botta at Khorsabad, and still in the same year, 1845, Layard, competing with French success, excavated Nimrud, ancient Karhu, located south of Khorsabad and south of Khorsabad and Nineveh. On November 9th, 1845, he started his excavation upon the remains of the structure, imposing dimensions at the southwestern extremity of the tell. The further work laid bare the walls of a structure which proved to be an unfinished palace, almost entirely destroyed by fire. Though there is no systematic archaeological record in modern standard from his period, according to layered description, the walls of its main halls were paneled with stone slabs bearing reliefs of battle scenes and card ceremonies. He reports some of the slabs were found laying on the floor next to the wall, either in disorder or arranged in rows. Many reliefs were badly damaged, some by fire, others deliberately defaced by chiseling. And curiously, most of the complete relief were found with their face toward the wall, strangely concealing the sculptures from excavators. In some cases, edges had been cut away, and several letters of the inscription being destroyed in order to make the stones fit into the walls of the structure. This is the first discovery of the inscription of Tiglath-Pileser III. The slabs bearing the texts were thus found as reused by a later king for his own edifice, which was never completed. And that later king was revealed to be Esarhaddon. After the excavation of Layard, a few good sculptures and inscriptions were then brought to British Museum, but many others were left in the field, for which Layard is the field journal. Here, this is the field journal, held in the British Library, and later publication of cuneiform copies are only sources available for us. The original object is unavailable. Since then, further archaeological discoveries were continuously achieved by Layard himself and his successors. Loftus George Smith in the 19th century. In the 20th century, the site was further excavated in 1950s, then 1974 to 76, and again in 1989 by English, Polish, and Iraqi missions. And they unearthed various sort of texts belonging to or relating to Tiglath-Pileser III. Apart from Nimrud, several texts of Tiglath-Pileser were also found at a number of other sites in Iraq, Syria, and Iran. After those discoveries and the subsequent studies, it was revealed that the Tiglath-Pileser's inscription mentioned the names of at least 4 Hebrew kings, Menahem, Pekah, and Hoshea of Israel, and Ahaz of Judah, as well as Rezin, king of Damascus, all of whom were mentioned in the Bible. However, much more beyond such biblical connections, it has become now fully apparent that the reign of Tiglath-Pileser III marked the beginning of the real imperial phase of Assyria, and that this period of time should be regarded as a watershed in the history of the ancient Near East. I would like to define roughly the position of Tiglath-Pileser III's reign in the history of Assyria. In the 14th, 13th century BC, in the Middle Assyrian period, the kingdom of Assyria was first formed as a territorial state along with its provincial system, roughly half a millennium before the reign of Tiglath-Pileser III. And then during the subsequent period of weakness in the 11th and 10th centuries, Assyria's territorial holdings were greatly reduced, and its administrative and economic systems broke because of the intrusion of numerous Aramean tribes and a series of bad harvests. In the 9th century, the pre-imperial phase, Assyrian ruler mounted aggressive military campaigns in order to recover land once regarded as the land of Ashur. This reconquista-like advance reached its peak with the ambitious campaigns which were conducted almost every year of the great conquerors Ashur-Nasir-Pal II, Shalmaneser III, and Adad-nirari III. Their campaigns reached deep into Syria, and Urartu, Zagros, and Babylon. However, these rulers didn't annex territories beyond the territorial land of Ashur. Very roughly speaking, the end result was a show of military might without achieving lasting Assyrian dominion over those lands. The first half of the 8th century is generally regarded as the period of Assyrian decline. Several states grew substantially in power and rivaled the Assyrian Empire, Assyrian might, in particular Urartu in the north and Damascus in the west, each of which imposed its hegemony on the pretoria of the neighboring states. To the south and the southeast, there was gradual disintegration of centralized authority in Babylonia. Babylon Super-Nippo established religious and economic centers, regularly clashed with semi-nomadic Aramean tribes. And the king of Babylon occasionally had to appeal to Assyria for military support. The internal stability of Assyria also declined in this period due to a number of internal revolts and the rise of influential Assyrian high officials whose powers and influence rivaled the king. Far-flung campaigns, as well as victory in battle against the chief enemies, decreased markedly. Assyria's fortune dramatically changed when Tiglath-Pileser III ascended the throne. This king, in the course of his 18-year reign, reshaped the political map of the ancient Near East and made Assyria once again the dominant power. Like his powerful predecessors, he mounted campaigns in all directions, pushing the boundary of Assyria outward. In addition, he annexed new territories beyond the traditional border of Assyria. This is a result on map, quite simplistically, but here Neo-Assyrian and West Semitic countries located to the west of the Euphrates were transformed into province. As for Median territory in the east, rural, weak, and powerful alike were brought into submission, and the Assyrian province and the colonies were constructed in their land. Toward the end of his reign, Tiglath-Pileser conquered Babylonia and declared himself king of Babylon, participating in the Babylonian New Year festival, something none of his predecessors has done in a clear way. The map on the slide shows the extent of Assyria proper, so territories absorbed into the provincial system after the territorial gain of Tiglath-Pileser III. The detail of the reign of Tiglath-Pileser III are known from various written sources, including the lower inscriptions, letters, and administrative text, as well as chronographic text. I will set the focus of my talk on the lower inscriptions on which I'm working, and now preparing as a co-author with the late Chaim Tadmor a new edition of them. I will talk about the project soon. The lower inscription was a text whose composition, incision, and placement were commissioned by the king in order to commemorate his military accomplishment and the construction work, or to display his proprietorship of the object, such as buildings, boards, weights, etc. On the slide, the example of Tiglath-Pileser's inscriptions, stone reliefs of the palace, clay tablets, bronze iron weight, and rock reliefs, etc. The corpus of family identified inscriptions of Tiglath-Pileser III currently comprise 63 texts in my counting. with 7 other inscriptions which may be attributed to Tiglath-Pileser, though some arbitrarily. And there are also known 2 other inscriptions belonging to his officials, and 3 inscriptions ascribed to his wife, Yaba. The chart shows a variety of objects made of stone, clay, and metal bearing these inscriptions. The numbers 1 to 34 of the stone slab marked by red line. This, however, actually comprises altogether basically a single analytic account with many lacunae. We call it the Karuk Annals. As I will talk soon, the 4 or 5 series or versions of this annals are originally extant, I believe. Thus, this reduced the actual number of the inscriptions of Tiglath-Pileser down to the 34 or 33. Let me briefly describe the research history. 1851, Layard published his inscriptions in the cuneiform character from Assyrian monuments, copies of all the inscriptions of Tiglath-Pileser III that were discovered in his excavations at Nimrud. Over the next 2 decades, Rawlinson Norris and George Smith, early pioneers in Assyriology, published copies of other inscriptions of Tiglath-Pileser III found at Karhu. In the cuneiform inscriptions of Western Asia, Volume 2 and Volume 3. Following those pioneering works and other significant philological works by Smith and Eberhard Schrader, the studies of this king's inscription was brought to new stage in 1893 with Paul Rost's Die Keilschrifttext Tiglath-Pileser III. This book, containing editions of the then known text with hand-drawn facsimiles, served for many years as a standard for the study of Tiglath-Pileser III. When the British team resumed excavation at Nimrud in the 1950s, under the direction of Max Mallowan, a new inscription of Tiglath-Pileser III, as well as numerous letters and administrative texts relating to his reign, were unearthed. Donald J. Wiseman published the royal inscriptions in a series of articles on the journal Iraq. In 1962, Richard D. Barnett and Margaret Faulkner published a comprehensive and well-illustrated study of Tiglath-Pileser's relief from Nimrud. This made the fundamental data for the reconstruction of the text inscribed on stone orthostat widely available. With the discovery of new texts and advance of philological knowledge, a new standard edition was needed. This happened only in 1994, almost 100 years after the work of Rost, when Haim Tadmor published the inscriptions of Tiglath-Pileser III, king of Assyria. Many of the complicated philological problems associated with editing text no longer available on the original object were largely solved in this volume by examining and cross-checking draft copies made in the field by Layard, Rawlinson, and Smith. Those manuscripts had not been published until that time. Tadmor included all of the Tiglath-Pileser's inscriptions and known to him, and also published the hand copies of Layard and other pioneers. I am currently preparing a new edition of the royal inscription of Tiglath-Pileser III and his son and successor, Shalmaneser V, for the royal inscription of Neo-Assyrian period project, LINAP in short, which is running under the directorship of Professor Grant Frame of University of Pennsylvania, as already Professor Durand mentioned. The volume is scheduled to be mentioned in the late 2011 or early 2012. This new volume follows closely the text edition of Tadmor in many regards, though it naturally includes a number of corrections as well as materials that Tadmor couldn't include in his volume. Now the classification of the inscription. According to Tadmor's historiographic criteria for classification of the corpus, Tiglath-Pileser III inscription fall into three categories. 1. Annals, the text whose historical narrative is arranged chronologically. 2. Summary inscriptions, a text whose narrative is arranged in the geographic pattern. 3. Miscellaneous text, text classified as labels, dedicatory inscriptions, as well as the other texts that were too fragmentarily preserved to classify them as annals or summary inscriptions clearly. Let me talk first about the inscriptions relating to the palace built by Tiglath-Pileser III at Karku, as it is the most significant site from which most of Tiglath-Pileser's texts originate. The major text inscribed on stone slabs that decorated the rooms of the palace at Karku is an annalistic text, normally called the Karuk Annals, already I mentioned. Karuk Annal was composed toward the end of his 18-year reign. And the text represents the last and longest version of the king's annals. Unfortunately, barely 1/3, if not less, of the whole text has survived. Nevertheless, it is one of the most significant texts of Tiglath-Pileser. Let me spend some time to talk about the process used to reconstruct this text. In the mid-19th century, Layard discovered many of these slabs in the ruins of two monumental buildings at Karku. Some slabs were found in the unfinished southwest palace here. And this southwest palace is constructed by Esarhaddon in the southwest corner of the citadel mound, while other slabs were unearthed in the central palace here in the center. The unfinished palace of Tiglath-Pileser III, situated in the center of the citadel mound, which has been later almost completely destroyed. From the find spots and the position of the excavated slabs recorded by layers, it can be deduced that all the slabs originally were part of the central palace. And as I have already said, Esarhaddon dismantled Tiglath-Pileser's unfinished royal residence, central palace. And as I have already said, Esarhaddon dismantled unfinished royal residence and transported the sculptures of the palace of Tiglath-Pileser to southwest corner of the citadel, where they were to be reused in his own palace, the palace of Esarhaddon. So the slabs are discovered partly here, and part of the slabs are brought here as a material for the next building. That's the situation. Tiglath-Pileser III followed his predecessor Ashur-natsir-pal II, the man who transformed the city of Karuk into the chief administrative center of the kingdom, in decorating the palace with colossal sculpted and inscribed orthostat. Ashur-natsir-pal's second army of scribes composed for his palace walls a single non-annalistic standard inscription, and incised the same text repeatedly on hundreds of slabs in the northwest palace at Nimrud, with only minor variation in its contents. The final version of his annals, however, was inscribed on pavement slabs of the temple of the city's patron deity Ninurta, and not in his royal residence, palace. In some regards, Tiglath-Pileser followed Ashur-Nasir's tradition of decorative reliefs and accompanying text, but he also deviated from that tradition. The Tiglath-Pileser had a full version of annals written across several series of sculpted slabs that decorated walls, and he had non-annalistic inscription or summary inscriptions inscribed on pavement slabs in the same building. So annals are on the wall, the summary inscriptions are on the pavement floor. Most of these do not survive today, however, with many being destroyed or lost in antiquity or by the early exploratory excavations. Sadly, we will never know with certainty how well decorated Tiglath-Pileser's palace was at the time of his death. Tiglath-Pileser had a full version of annals. Sorry, I read already this one. Excuse me. Let me try again. Roughly speaking, the wall slabs, those bearing the Caliph annals, fall into two types. The first format divides the surface of the slab into three registers, like this: 1, 2, 3, three registers, with the top and bottom registers sculpted mostly with scenes of battle, and the middle register bearing inscriptions. Second format utilized the entire surface of the slab to depict the image of gigantic figure of king like this, or his attendant eunuch, and sometimes of the winged priest or divinities. Actually, these things are with different color, but actually it's the my photograph simply fakes the impression, and both of them are coming from the same steel. Given the current state of preservation of text and the fact that many of the slabs were destroyed and removed from their original position in antiquity, it is impossible to determine which room in Tiglath-Pileser's palace had the inscription. A certain practice, however, can be inferred from the palace of Sargon II at Dur-Sharkin. It is more well preserved. In that palace, each room contained an entire text, a complete version of Sargon II's annals from beginning to end. Inscriptions in neighboring room often varied, sometimes in very minor ways, and a number of lines per slab varied from room to room. For example, the slab in room 2 were inscribed with 15 lines of text, those in room 5 with 17 lines, and those in room 13 with 15 lines. And the slabs in room 10, however, bore a long, non-annalistic text, rather than the recension of the annals. Based on this later model, Schrader tentatively proposed that the Tiglath-Pileser's Caliph annals were arranged in a similar manner. Thus, rooms in the central palace contained a complete recension of the annals, and the number of lines appearing on each slab in those rooms varied from room to room. Therefore, slabs with different numbers of lines couldn't have stood side by side in the same room of the palace, and must have come from different rooms in that building. Taking these criteria into account, I have divided following Tadmor the Caliph annals into three hypothetical series, series A, B, and C. Slabs with 7 lines of text are classified as series A, and those with 12 lines of text are classified as series B, and those of more lines, up to 20 to 30 lines over colossal figures as Series C. All of these series are only partially preserved. The text of Series A and Series B are generally written in the middle register of the wall slabs that have relief in the upper and lower registers. But entry or corner slabs here, and this is entry slabs, entry and corner slabs could differ, as text could be inscribed over sculptures and cover the entire surface of the slabs. Here you do not see the parts of three parts, register 1, 2, 3, or something like that. We have not such things. Series A and Series B were probably exact duplicate of the same inscription, but were written on the wall of different rooms in the Tiglath-Pileser's palace. Series A and Series B are subdivided into many units of text whose widths appear to have been uniform throughout. Narrow vertical bands of unscribed space, here, this one. Band of unscribed space separates each unit of text. Individual units were not restricted to a single slab, and thus a unit could run over part of two adjacent slabs. Therefore, it was not uncommon for a single slab to be inscribed with the end of the one unit and the beginning of the next unit. This arrangement of the 7-line and the 12-line series clearly indicated that the wall slab were inscribed in situ. The width of inscribed band of text, I call this one the text unit, varied from series to series, circa 1.5 meters for the 7-line series, Series A, and slightly more than 2 meters for the 12-line series, Series B. The only 11 units of text are preserved for Series A, and 8 units are preserved for Series B. And now Series C. Slabs of Series C are mostly known from layers field copies. Original is not existent. One slab, however, is in the British Museum, and the 2 other slabs were photographed after their discovery in Polish excavations in 1976. The width of the band of text on these slabs was apparently often considerably more than 2 meters. The known Series C slabs appear to have actually originated from at least 2 and possibly 3 rooms of the palace. However, the fragmentary condition of the text, the many lacunae, and the fact that the most of the originals are no longer available makes such a distinction rather conjectural. So Series C could be 2 or 3 or maybe 4 series, but I treat this altogether as a Series C. Since only a small percentage of Caliph annals is preserved today, there are large gaps in the text, some spanning several years of military campaigns, military narration. As the table shows at the places marked by blue color, the report describing the event of the 4, 5, 6, 10, 12, and the 4 Spalu, or regular year, are completely missing. I will talk about the term Palu later. The annals were likely composed simultaneously with the summary inscriptions that were also placed within the same palace. According to a chronological notation found in the summary inscriptions, about which I shall talk soon, the texts were composed after the 70th Palu, 729th. So the Karufu Annals also should have been included events up to the same date, the king's 70th Palu. The account of the 16th and the 70th Palus are probably missing as well. In addition to the large gap in which entire campaign reports are missing, there are numerous smaller lacuna in nearly all the preserved narration, including the prologue and epilogue. Ideally, I should edit Series A and Series B and Series C as separate text, but this would present an already poorly preserved inscription as being even more fragmentary than it already is. This would also obscure the original contents of that text and break its chronological narrative flow. That for the purpose of the new edition making, we attempted to reconstruct the Karufu Annals from all of the known series A, B, and C. A chronological order of the badly damaged and mostly missing military narration can be reconstructed from information included in the chronological data found in the text called the Eponym Chronicle, as well as those of many other texts. The distinction of extant annals unit is shown in the table on the slide. The major text used to reconstruct a single hypothetical running account in the Lineup edition are given in bold type and marked by yellow color. So it starts with Series A, and then it turns to the Series B, and turns to the Series C, and in this way we get the running account, even though originally those are the different texts, but very similar ones. Okay. After this rather complicated textual reconstruction, the text comes to show its contents in a reasonable order. I would like to quote some passages, adding some comments. The very beginning of the text, which must originally have comprised the royal name and title, is lost, and the subsequent part containing the royal epithet has survived only fragmentarily. This is the part found on Series A, remaining on the indirectly joined 3 fragments. 2 of them are in the Archaeological Museum of Zurich, and another was discovered in Polish excavations in 1976. The reconstructed text reads as follows. Precious scion of Baltir, Ashur, beloved of the god goddess, name broken, Fu la la la, for the dominion of the land, la la la, break, who grew up for kingship, break, military governor, break, one to increase voluntary offering for la 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 la. So many breaks. A fragmentary line of epithet continues further, with some of them surviving. And then the analytic account starts on the slab found in Polish excavations in 1976, apparently placed at the entrance of the palace. Text read, at the beginning of my reign, my first Palu, in the 5th month after I sat in greatness on the throne of kingship, the god Ashur, my lord, put his trust in me, and I marched against the Aramean tribes. Here, the years of the king's reign is counted with the Akkadian term Palu, which originally means turnus, or turn, or cycle, corresponding to a single year in the king's reign. In this annals, the first Palu is assigned to the accession year that began with the king's accession and continued to the end of the year in the spring season, March, April. Thus, the next second paru corresponding to the first full lunar year, and then the third paru for the second lunar year, etc. The year descriptions in the annals continued in this way. Later part of the same year, after a gap of unknown length, shows the typical styles and the contents of the military account in the Caliph annals. The part is surviving now on a fragment of a large carved slab, which is housed in the British Museum. It tells of a campaign to Babylonia, a campaign to Babylonia. I will read parts from the restored text to show the typical motifs of this, his military account. I rebuilt those cities. I built a city on the top of a hill called Humud. I built and completed it from its foundation to its parapet. Inside it, I found a palace for my royal residence. I named it Kar Ashur, set up the weapon of the god Ashur, my lord, therein, and settled the people of the foreign lands conquered by me therein. I imposed upon them tax and tribute and considered them as inhabitants of Assyria. The text continued then. I ruled, a break, from Dur-Kurigalzu, Sipar of the god Shamash, Nasiku, the Nakuru, the cities of Karduniash, Babylonia, as far as Ukunu River, by the shore of the lower sea. I annexed this area to Assyria and placed my eunuch as the provincial governor over them. From their sheep levy, which I take annually, I apportioned 240 sheep and settled some thousands to the province of Turtanu, 10,000 to the province of Pares Herald, some thousands to the province of the chief cupbearer, some thousands to the province of the land Balharzi, and 5,000 to the province of Mazamua. I united them, considered them as the inhabitants of Assyria, and imposed the yoke of the god Ashur, my lord, upon them as Assyrians. The text continued in the next unit. I skip here several sentences and read only the last part of the first part account. I fashioned on the steel my royal image and the image of the great god my lords, inscribed on it the mighty victories that I had achieved over foreign lands in the names of the god Ashur my lord, and erected it in so and so place. I placed 10 talents of gold by the heavy standard, and the text continued like this. And then comes the beginning of the second paru. In my second paru, I went to so and so place. This is the basic style of the military account. The passage that I have just read aloud, those describing the king's campaign in Babylonia show typical contents of each military account of the annals. We can summarize them as follows: a conquest and plundering, a restoration of the conquered towns, a construction of the Assyrian bases, renaming them with the Assyrian ceremonial names, such as Kar Ashur, meaning key or colony of the god Ashur. 4. Details of provincial building, a setting of a provincial governor, normally eunuch, loyal to the king. B. Imposition of tax, a part of which directed to the temple of the god Ashur. C. Large-scale deportation, in this case, deportation of Arameans in Babylonia to other distant lands in provinces on frontiers. This deportation caused a large-scale demographic change, which was aimed to secure the stable rule over conquered territory. 5. Setting up of monument bearing a royal image with commemorative inscriptions, perpetuating the royal military achievement. and 6, receipt of gift and tax from local rulers. These typical components repeatedly appear in the analytic account. The account continues in similar way according to the Palu numbers, probably originally until the 17th Palu. The lengthy military report was concluded with the building account telling about the construction of a palace. Apparently, the very structure whose walls were decorated with the autostat with reliefs and inscriptions. Only a small part remains on the colossal slab fragment of Series C. The text is known only from a draft copy made by Rawlinson. The original object is not available. This is a Rawlinson's copy. Text reads, "Inside the city Karuk, I built a cedar palace for my lordly residence, and built Hirani a replica of the palace of the land Hatti that is Syria for my pleasure. I made the dimensions of its site some large cubits in length and 60 large cubits in width larger than the former palaces of my ancestors by reclaiming land from the Tigris River." Though here remains only a small part from the originally much longer description of the palace, we are informed of this palace with another inscription of a summary type written on a clay tablet. I will deal with this text later. Epilogue that would have followed this building account in the annals is totally lost. Now I turn to the summary inscriptions, a different type of inscriptions. Palace was decorated, and not only with the analytic text as said, analytic text was on the wall, but the palace was decorated also by summary inscriptions on the floor. 14 texts of this sort are known. All of these probably commemorate construction of his palace at Karhu, work that took place toward the end of his reign. Each text in this category, when the first line of text has survived, opens with the traditional Mesopotamian mark of property, Ekar, a royal name, Ekar so-and-so, palace of so-and-so. On the basis of material and formal criteria, the known 14 inscriptions of this category are divided into two groups: inscriptions written on stone slabs and inscriptions written on clay tablets. The large stone slab inscribed with this type of text probably were pavement slab, judging from the colossal size and shape of BM 118936, my text number 39, which measures, very roughly speaking, 2 meters times 3 meters, gigantic. So one side is quite big. BM 118936 is the only slab inscribed with a summary inscription available for the first-hand examination. The other 4 stone slabs were deemed by their excavators unsuitable or too heavy to transport back to London and were left in the field. The texts are known only from the hand copies of early explorers. Although those objects are no longer available for examination, they were also probably pavement slabs similar to this one. 7 clay tablets, all large and well-baked, and with their contents written in a single column, are inscribed with Tiglath-Pileser's summary inscriptions. None of them are complete, but the best preserved is K3751 that you are seeing on the slide. Although some of these are discovered in the early days of Assyriology and bearing K number, meaning Kuyunjuk, Nineveh, they must have originated actually from the Nabu temple at Karhu. The copies of summary inscriptions on tablets may have been served as a draft or forelage for those inscribed on the stone slabs. So maybe those are draft, the text on clay tablets draft. The arrangement of the event described in the summary inscriptions is more or less fixed. The text begins with a brief prologue, which contains a short list of king's title and episodes, then summarize a military achievement by geographical region. First south, and then east, then north, and the last is west, and conclude with the building account and the epilogue. Let us take an example of the opening from the pavement slab preserved only as the 19th century hand copy of Loftus and George Smith, after the squeeze made of Loftus that was now lost, unfortunately, and unavailable. This is a copy of Loftus. So it reads, the palace of Tiglath-Pileser III, great king, mighty king, king of the world, king of Assyria, king of Babylon, king of Sumer and Akkad, king of the four quarters of the world, the one chosen by the glance of the god Enlil. After this opening comes the geographically summarized military account. From the beginning of my reign until my 70th Palu, I captured the tribes Itu, Lubu, Hamaranu, Arameans, as many as they are living in the bank of the Tigris, Euphrates, Slapu, and the Ukunu rivers, as far as the shore of the lower sea of the rising sun. I annexed those areas to Assyria and placed my official as governor over them. Here, the proprietary marker, the palace of Tiglath-Pileser, at the beginning, is followed by a long list of his title and episode, and then military account comes with a chronological notation from the beginning of my reign until my 70th Palu. This notation is preserved in 3 other text summary inscriptions. On this ground, I assume, following Tadmo, that all of the summary inscriptions were written in the same year, except only 1 or 2 texts, which are probably written earlier. The distribution of geographically separated episode preserved in the summary inscription is summarized in this chart. As I have already said, the summary of campaign usually begins with the event in the south, then continued to the doors of the east and the north, and conclude with event in the west. Geographical order is counterclockwise, with Assyria in the center. The breaking from the chronological arrangement of the annals, a military narration of the summary inscriptions divides the text into the following main units. 1. The Babylonian war fought in 745 and 31 to 29. 2. The Zagros campaign of 744 and 737. 3. The wars with Urartu and its allies in 743, 37, and 35. 4. The conquest of the Syria and Palestine in the 742 to 40, 38, and then 34 to 32. Note that the geographical order roughly coincides with the chronological order of the first campaign mounted in that direction. I mean, the Babylonia in the south, the first campaign is 745. The first campaign to Zagros in the east is the next year, 744. And Urartu in the north is 743 next year. And Syria in the west is 742. This is also next year. It is hard to say whether the king's military target were predetermined in this fixed geographic pattern, or if this is just pure coincidence. For historical reconstruction, summary inscriptions are lesser value than analytic text, but they are of utmost importance for filling in many gaps in the Kalk annals. The building account, which is preserved only in K3751, describes in detail the construction of the palace, as I have already said. Thus, filling the gap of the Kalk annals, let us see the part of the account. I'm skipping actually some part, and I read part by part. With a keen understanding and the broad knowledge that the sage of the god, the prince, the god-redeemed heir, granted to me, I built in Kalk a cedar palace. I decorated them with ivory, ebony, boxwood, muscano wood, brush juniper, Indian wood, and juniper, tribute from the kings of the land Hatti and from Aramean and Chaldean rulers, whom I subdued with the power of my heroism, and I filled them with splendor. I skipped the breaks. The text continues, the beautiful text. I roofed them with long beams of cedar, which was sweet to smell as the scent of the hashu wood, a product of the Mount Amanus, Mount Lebanon, and Mount Amanana. Thus I demonstrated the appropriate care for their roofing. I fashioned stones worthy of the stonecutter's craft, and thus made its gate befitting a royal palace. I fastened a band of the shiny silver and the Eshmaru silver on double doors of the cedar and the cypress, which bestow great pleasure on those who enter them, and whose fragrance wafted into the heart, and I hung them wherever there were gates. I set up in its entrance statues of lion, the Shedi, and Ramassu, whose features are very skillfully wrought, and which were crossed with splendor, and I made them stand there as an object of wonder for the people. I laid stretchboard slabs, gypsum, and parutu alabaster at their feet, and so I brightened their exit. Moreover, I fashioned statues, guardians of the great god creatures of Apsu, and I placed them around the palace's supporting wall. Thus, I endowed it with splendor. This interesting and detailed description of the cedar palace is impossible to confirm archaeologically anymore after the destruction of the structure in the ancient time. Despite this inscription, the building work of Tiglath-Pileser's palace was likely never completed, as the excavators unearthed some incompletely sculpted and inscribed slabs. Until here, I talked mainly about the text belonging to or related to the central palace of Kalku. And now, some other analytic text. In addition to the Kalk annals, there were other analytic texts. Setting aside minor pieces, I would like to spend a short time talking about the inscriptions on the stele and the rock face. The inscription on the stele, number 35 in my number, on the left side of the slide, is reported to have been discovered in Iran, and which is badly damaged. It narrates events of Tiglath-Pileser first 9 Palus, 745 to 737, including the Median campaign and taken in his 9th Palu, with possible skipping in the middle. The stele was inscribed and erected in celebration of his successes during that very campaign. The text represents a much earlier version of the annals than the Kalk annals. The earliest known analytic account is written on the rock face at Miramerji in Iraqi Kurdistan. The photograph in the middle of the slide, and the hand copy of Nicholas Postgate is on the right side. The text is inscribed in the frame, and over the image of the king was divine symbols. Unlike other known texts of this king in this genre, the Mila-Merge rock relief narrates only the event of the 9th Paru, only 1 year, the campaign against Uluba, a buffer zone between the Assyria and Urartu. The versions of annals and the summary inscriptions refer to a total of 7 occasions on which Tiglath-Pileser set up monuments bearing a royal image and inscription in frontiers which the king visited during his campaigns. This is one of the favorite motifs of Assyrian royal inscription since the time of Ashur-natsir-pal II and Shalmaneser III, kings in the 9th century BC. The monument of Tiglath-Pileser III were reported set up in Media, and then Dur-Tukulti-Apil-Eshara in the east side of Tigris, Shilhazi on the foot of Zagros, Uluba in the Urartu Assyrian border, Turushpa, the capital of Urartu, Gaza in Palestine, and the Brook of Egypt. 2 of those monuments, those set up in Media and Uluba, are actually identified with the objects that you saw here, the Iran stele and the Mila-Merge rock relief. Now, some miscellaneous text. As a fragmentary preserved or the short inscriptions are also known. The slide shows some of them. The badly damaged text is seen on the colossal stone bull erected at the gateway guardian, erected as a gateway guardian in the city Hadatu, modern Arslan Tash in Syria. This is now exhibited in the Louvre. It preserved both an account of military narration and a report of building activities in that city. Several mud bricks originating in the ruins of the temple of the gods Ashur and Adad in the city of Ashur, recording work on those buildings. One of the exemplars is here on the slide, left bottom. Others seen here as object bearing a proprietary label, short inscription, on the bronze lion weight, a glazed tile with handle and the stone beads. Now, historical overview of the reign of Tiglath-Pileser as reconstructed. Tiglath-Pileser III conducted a large-scale military campaign in almost every year of his reign, and thus built for himself a widespread empire during his 18-year reign. In this regard, it is unfortunate that only 1/3 or less of entire text of Tiglath-Pileser's Kalku Annals is preserved today. The gaps in the annals are, however, filled in by other analytic texts, especially those of the Iran stele and the Mila-Merge rock relief that we have seen, as well as by some account in his summary inscriptions. Those accounts are presumably mostly extracted from the annals. A chronological reconstruction of Tiglath-Pileser's campaigns is possible thanks to the data preserved in the chronographic text. First, the eponym chronicle, and the second, the Babylonian chronicle. And the former lists in chronological order the target of the king's campaign, Assyrian king's campaign. And the latter records major events around the city and the temple of Babylon. Using these chronological data, we can reconstruct with reasonable certainty the progress of Tiglath-Pileser's military enterprises and other events, as shown in this chart, thus overcoming many gaps found in each of individual inscriptions. Here I talk on the marked place. The rise of Tiglath-Pileser III to the Assyrian throne is recorded in the eponymous chronicle as having taken place in the month Ayaru in 745. This is the year following a revolt in the capital Karku, and the period during which the reign of his predecessor, Ashur-Nerari V, came to an end. Tiglath-Pileser III was probably an upstart who seized the throne by force, coming from the subsidiary line of the royal blood. He was probably a son of Adad-Nerari III, as he claims in his Greek inscriptions from Ashur. In his accession year, the year in which Tiglath-Pileser ascended the throne, he conducted a major campaign into Babylonia, as I have already mentioned. In the next year, year 1, this is counted as the second Paru in the king's text. Tiglath-Pileser's army marched against countries in the Zagros mountain to the east, along the so-called Khorasan road, reaching to the Hamadan area. He plundered lands in that area and annexed the lands Parsua and Beit Hamban and made them Assyrian province. Beginning in his second regnal year, Tiglath-Pileser turned his attention to the northwest and west. There he fought with Sarduri, the king of Urartu, and his allies in Anatolia and North Syria, checking Urartian advance from the north down to Syria. Tiglath-Pileser surrounded the troublesome anti-Assyrian state of Arpad in Syria. After a long 3-year siege, which began in his 3rd year as king and ended in his 5th year, Arpad fell and was annexed to Assyria. Let's see this process on the map. First to the Babylonia, and then to the east to the Media, and then to Urartu and North Syria with the allies from Syria, and then the central Syria. Okay. After the first round of campaigns that we have seen in all the 4 directions, south, east, north, and west, in counterclockwise, counterclockwise, the king devoted his 6th regnal year to the campaign against Uluba, the fortress located in Iraqi Kurdistan, buffer zone between Urartu and Assyria, and annexed the cities in that area. In his 7th year, Assyrian army marched once again to the west, and Unki and Hatarika in the central Syria was annexed. All of the vassal king of the west, including Rezin of Damascus and Menahem of Samaria, both are known from the Bible, paid tribute to Tiglath-Pileser III. Let's check the process on the map. First, Uluba, the buffer zone between Assyria and Urartu, and to the central, and then the central Syria. In the following 6th year, his 8th to 13th year as king, the army of Tiglath-Pileser marched to the directions to which he had already once advanced. This time around, he invaded further into distant land. He began this 3rd stage of campaign with that against Media in his 8th year. And then he advanced in the north to the heart of Urartu, as far as the capital, Trushpa, reached in the west to the border of Egypt through Philistia, and annexed Damascus and the northern part of Israel. Again, let's check on the map. First campaign, second campaign to Media, and then deeper into the territory of Urartu, and then Philistia, and the central Syria and Palestine. From the 14th year onward, the king put his attention on Babylonia. He defeated the Chaldean tribes of southern Babylonia in that year. And then, after the pause of 1 year in the 6th regnal year, Tiglath-Pileser defeated Nabu-Mukin-Zeri, king of Babylon, and ascended the Babylonian throne. He participated in the Akitu festival in the beginning of the new year. That is his 17th lunar year, just before his death. So, yeah, I complete with map at the end. As a result of all of these activities, more than 15 provinces are created. This is a result of Tiglath-Pileser III. More than 15 provinces were created in newly conquered land beyond the traditional realm of Assyria. Assyrian officials, apparently eunuchs, loyal to the crown, were set in these provinces as the governors. Two-way deportation of hundreds of thousands of people caused a large-scale demographic change within the entire Near East. Soldiers, craftsmen, and laborers, as well as a large amount of goods, precious metals, stones, textiles, woods, cattle, and sheep, as booty and tribute, flowed into the Assyrian homeland. The placement of the dual Mesopotamian kingdoms of Assyria and Babylonia under a single kingship created new geopolitical complex. The inclusion of Babylon, the most prestigious Mesopotamian city, with its strong self-centralistic tendency within the Assyrian Empire, would prove to be a thorn in the side of later kings of Assyria. In short, these policies not only enlarged the size of Assyria, but also increased the complexity of Assyria in many senses. And these policies and practices were continued in the following period from the reign of his son and the successor until the fall of Nineveh in 612. Epilogue. According to the Babylonian Chronicle, Tiglath-Pileser died in the month Tebet, the 10th month of Babylonian calendar. And his son Shalmaneser V ascended the thrones of Assyria and Babylonia in the same month. This suggests that the normal royal succession occurred without any serious disturbance. His successor, Shalmaneser V, should have been well suited to the task, since he held an important role in his father's administration as the crown prince, as suggested by letters written by him to his father, the king. In those letters, he used his birth name, Ururaya. The letters were investigated by Karin Radner. He could have been a son of Yaba, Tiglath-Pileser III's queen, whose funerary inscription on a tablet and the two gold bowls with her name were found from a tomb hidden under the pavement in the domestic wing of the Northwest Palace in Nimrud. They are discovered by Iraqi excavations in 1989. The short and obscure 5-year reign of Shalmaneser V ended with internal strife, whose details are recounted by the man who came to power as a result, Sargon II. Sargon II doesn't record normally his genealogy in his inscriptions, and thus often considered as an usurper. He is yet attested as a son of Tiglath-Pileser III in two texts, one short inscription on the glazed tile and the Babylonian letter sent to him. The reliability of these pieces of evidence is perhaps not indisputable, but if we take them at the face value, the blood of Tiglath-Pileser III continued into the so-called Sargonid dynasty that experienced the denizens of Neo-Assyrian Empire. In any case, the Neo-Assyrian Empire was firmly established in the period of Sargonid kings, certainly on the foundations built by Tiglath-Pileser III. Thank you for your attention.